Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another weekly fighting roundup. And so, if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. Obviously, like I mentioned, last week was a slow week for the boxing and MMA news. To be honest, there's been a few slow weeks through the festive period, through the New Year's period, but now boxing is well and truly back, you would have to say, and same with MMA as well. There's been, a good UFC event, and I think in general, combat sports is getting back to it now. And after the little blimp over the holiday period that you always get, it's now looking like there's a few things going on. And there has been a few things going on this week, and we'll start off with the boxing news, of course, being that Heisa will fight Kvetkov February 8th. Medina versus Vasquez, Balderas versus Solano, and Barrera versus Rios will fight February 21st. Liao is set to fight Kameda in March. I think that is an excellent fight, to be fair. I think that I got to give Liao a lot of respect for going over to Japan to fight Kameda, and I think in general it's just excellent to see a fighter like Kameda getting the challenges in which he's deserving, and I suppose maybe not getting out in Japan. Sometimes they're a little bit slow, a little bit reluctant to really push their champions against other champions, but they're doing that, and the Liao fight I think is a great fight. Hussein will fight Arnold February 15th. Bennett, Ali, Ashong and Udin will fight February 15th. Rafferty has joined Queensberry, and another signing for Queensberry. It's a name in which is a reputable name at British level, and it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with yet another step up in his next fight. But in general, I think Queensberry, what they're doing is just amazing, to be honest. I mean, there was one point in which Matchroom were dominating and they were signing new fighters like Queensberry are doing now. I mean, every week I'm pretty much saying a new signing in which Queensberry are making. They're not always the biggest of names. Sometimes they're amateur stars who's coming into professional for the first time, or, a lower, like a British type level fighter, but they're continually bolstering their roster, and it means they're going to be able to put continually good events on with good names on, and just have a really, really just big stable of fighters. And Queensberry, like I say, have been developing and, like I say, continuously bringing in fighters every single week. And the shows they have with Warren Boxing Management are excellent as well. And in general, they have, like I say, that great kind of roster of fighters. You don't see Matchroom having shows from kind of a different promotion because they have that many fighters. It just doesn't really seem to happen. But with Queensberry, it's happening quite often, and it's just very nice to see and impressive the turnaround in which Queensberry's had. And I think Queensberry is definitely on track to have an amazing 2025. Wilder is set to return in April. There's been kind of a few rumours of opponents, nothing kind of set in stone yet, but to be honest, I think it's going to be first a major step down in opponent. And to be honest, is there a point in it then? Like, does anybody care? I don't believe so. If he loses, then everybody will care, and then everybody will be like, really, I don't know if shocked or not, because we don't really know the level of opposition, but it's seemingly quite low level. But why come back to fight then? Is he trying to, go and have a comeback fight, get a win, grow some confidence, and then coming back again? I mean, you never know, but what, he's 40, 41 years of age? It would take a lot for Wilder to be able to get back into the higher levels of the heavyweight division. He's been written off by everybody at this point, and, if he is able to do it, then it'll be some miraculous comeback, but to be honest, I don't think many people, like myself, believe that that will end up happening. Moving on, Edmondson versus Kajawa, Barney Smith, Joyce Sharp versus Dillon, Etorma, Rueg, McCormack, Herrera, Turner, Frankham, and Isaacs will fight March 1st. And to be honest, this card isn't a big card. It's in Bournemouth. It's Garner fighting and returning to his home city, I believe. But you kind of look at the other fighters around, and you kind of have to say it's a bit of a to an extent, a comeback type card. I mean, we have Joyce on it, who of course is making his comeback off his loss versus Derek Chisora. We have Archie Sharp on it, who's making his comeback. We have, you know, uh, Carol Atama, who's still trying to build and re-gets to back to where he was. We have Turner as well. He's coming off the loss to Rafferty. So in general, I think it's kind of a get back type card where Queensbury are just putting some names in which they can get involved, but it's a real step down for Joyce, and I'm not too sure why he's wanting to fight out in Bournemouth on far down an undercard, but he's doing it, and is that going to do much for his career? I'm not too sure. Even if he goes and wins in spectacular fashion, I doubt the level of opposition will be anything that creditable. Would that be able to jump him straight into a high level heavyweight contention fight? I'd like to hope not, but I think he definitely has to improve upon a lot to be able to get back to the heights in which he once was. Moving on, Barinchik versus Davis, Mason versus James, Zayas versus Spommer, and Malink Mialnik Jr. versus Coyle will fight February 14th. I think Barinchik versus Davis is a great fight. I see what Top Rank have done by going down this route in which they're perhaps putting Davis up against the weakest of, on paper, champions in the division, but he's going to be a tough test, Barinchik. He was a tough test to Navarrete, and Davis, of course, is on a great run and is now properly testing himself and is coming off that excellent stoppage last time out, and in a fight in which I didn't believe he'd be able to win the way he did, but he did, and he looked very impressive. It's nice to see that he's getting this world title fight. Top Rankers, like, not just continually just plodding him through. This is his chance to be able to really put out a statement and to win a belt, of course. Coelho versus Olivo and Hernandez versus Ruiz will fight February 1st. Anderson is set to fight Collias February 14th, so that's the return of Jared Anderson, and against a weak kind of Greek heavyweight who's not really accomplished much and not really got the best of resumes. But I think Anderson is somebody who needs to go back to developing to see if he is able to get back to the heights in which he once was at, because that fight versus Bacoli, going into it, perhaps you didn't think that it was a step too far, but in hindsight, it definitely was. Physically, Bacoli was way too much for him. Anderson has skills, he has ability. Is he able to get that back? We'll have to wait and see. Certain fighters can, certain fighters can't. We're seeing that with Joe Joyce at the moment. He's pretty much lost all of his ability since the loss in which he had versus Zhang, well, the multiple losses he had versus Zhang. And so, it's been a tough rebuild for him. I'm sure it's going to be a tough rebuild for Anderson, but this is the first step to see if he's able to do that. Moving on, Bacoli has called out Joshua. They did a little bit of a face-off at the Ring Magazine Awards. I doubt that fight's going to happen next. It does seem likely that it's going to be Bacoli versus a Jagba, and to be honest, I'm here for that fight, so hopefully that will happen next. But Bacoli is always calling out different guys, different names, so no surprise that he's calling out Joshua again. Duarte is set to fight Prograis February 15th. I think that's an interesting contest. I mean, Prograis obviously coming off the loss versus Cattrall, where he scored a knockdown. He didn't look terrible. He looked like he still was a threat to an extent. Duarte is, gonna be a very live opponent. Gonna be aggressive. He's rebuilding, and still one of the bigger names in the Golden Boy stable, who's, to be honest, quite underrated, and is coming off a good performance himself on that undercard of the Billum Smith versus Zerda Ramirez Riyadh season card. So that could be a good fight. I think it could be, a step fight to get back to a high level. I don't know if he's ever going to have the skills to be able to beat somebody like a Ryan Garcia, in which, of course, he wasn't able to do before, but something like a Prograis could make for an entertaining power versus power type fight. KSI is rumoured to fight McGregor. Last week it was McGregor versus Logan Paul in India for 250 million. Now it's KSI saying that he's very down to fight McGregor, and then McGregor reposting it. To be honest, it's sad to see that McGregor's really entertaining this. He should be focusing on getting back into the UFC and getting back to what he's known for, but I just don't really think he cares about that credibility side of things. So, he at one time said that he'd never ever entertain KSI or Logan Paul, but now he's seemingly only wanting to talk about them, or only wanting to associate with them. So it's interesting, but I mean, to be honest, I doubt it will ever happen. Moving on, Lopez has turned down Top Rank's final offer to fight Matias. Like I mentioned last week, it seems like Lopez wants out of Top Rank and that contract that he went back and forth with Haney. He was at the Ring Magazine Awards and was seemingly saying that he's going to fight everyone. I don't know where his head at. I don't think head's at, but I don't think many fighters ever really do know where his head's at. But well, it's not with Matthias. He has called out Hitchens, which, to be fair, would be a better fight and would be a fight in which perhaps could be made. But it's just interesting to see how the Matthias fight was so close yet so far, and kind of in an instant, it was completely went from almost happening and seemingly being agreed to happen to then just not happening at all. And we'll have to wait and see if there is any sort of agreements around him versus Hitchens. Moving on, Flores Jr. will fight Lano February 19th. Moore has joined Salita Promotions. Gumph Manchester won via unanimous decision versus Williams. Shalali drew versus Tua. McAllister won via TKO in round 2 versus Towns. Teramawada Jr. won via TKO in round 2 versus Towns. No, versus Otobo. Zhu won via unanimous decision versus Ingram. Brown won via split decision versus Genson. Mahoney won via unanimous decision versus Zhang to become IBF Pan Pacific Super Welterweight Champion. McIntyre won via TKO in round 4 versus Salmon to become IBF Youth Super Middleweight Champion. Shuni won via TKO in round 2 versus Pot Jita to remain IBF Pan Pacific and WBO Global Heavyweight Champion. And Optai won via KO in round 4 versus Nyika to remain IBF World Cruiserweight Champion. And to speak a bit more about the card, in general, it was an excellent first show of 2024, first major big show of 2024, and in Australia it really shone some light on some of the talent there, and the Brown Genson fight was an entertaining fight. Obviously, Brown not from Australia, from Ireland, but she scored a nice knockdown and went on to a split decision, which could have definitely been a unanimous decision. I think Mahoney looked good. He looked confident. McIntyre again managed to get a nice stoppage himself. Terra getting a seemingly quite simple stoppage, showing that perhaps his technical ability isn't anything too crazy as of yet, but he's definitely got the power. And to be honest, you could say that's about a lot of the top heavyweights. So maybe he could go far. We'll have to wait and see. And Matchroom are definitely pushing him at this point. But my fighter of the week, in which I'm definitely going to make more of a thing of, fighter of the week each week on these weekly fighting roundups, is Justice Uni. I think he's had an excellent fight there versus Pot Gietier. Obviously, it's not been an opponent who perhaps is the highest of levels, but Huni looked very good. He was hardly really getting caught with shots. His movement looked like it had improved loads. I think he's grown a lot in confidence. I believe the step, back in opponents a little bit has definitely helped him develop, and I think perhaps he was going at a bit too high of a speed, which, a lot of fighters are put very quickly into higher ranked fights, but it's not always the best for their career. And I think the management of him has been excellent, to be completely honest. I think, now he's shown that his skills have improved a lot. He's definitely offering something different to a lot of heavyweights that are up and coming. He would have an excellent fight with Moses Atama, and I think it would be a very tough test. I think it could be one of the toughest tests for Atama, because Juni's going to be coming in confident. He's going to be coming in with a style which, like I say, is much better than that of the kind of sluggish type heavyweights in which we see. We've seen Itama call out Hrgovic and fighters similar to that. And to be fair, I don't think he's going to gain too much by beating Hrgovic, because his style is just not really that developed. It's quite one dimensional, and I think now he's had a loss, he's going to look even worse from then on out, Hrgovic. But Juni, I think, has grown as a fighter. Obviously, he had that stint versus Lorena, in which was, you know, a rocky fight for him, and he was on a big stage, and perhaps that gave a little bit of a sour taste in certain people's mouths because we weren't too sure if he was actually able to get to a high level or if it was just kind of a hype job. But the consistency of getting him back in the ring. He's had 3 fights since that Lorena fight, fought in I believe December and then fought now in January as well. It's excellent, and like I say, this has been, in my opinion, probably the most impressed I've seen of any performance that I've seen from him so far. So he's getting my fighter of the week. And then moving on to the main event, of course, as well, another fight in which you could give to the fighter of the week. Optai versus Nyika. Got my prediction right. I think I said it was round 3, ended up being round 4, but Optai with a destructive knockout. Nyika had him hurt at one point. He admitted that. He caught him with a shot in which stumbled him a little bit, rocked him a little bit, Opataya, but then Opataya was able to recover straight away, kept it close, which I thought he would, kept staying in his face, didn't let Nyika have any kind of rhythm, any kind of pace get going in his favour, and I believed, like I say, my prediction, I thought that would happen, and in the end it was an excellent performance for him, and a brutal knockout in which is only going to benefit his career and only going to push big fights more his way from what I believe. And he called out Ramirez, as I said in my fights and I want to see in 2025. That's the fight I want to see. That's the best cruiserweights against each other, and I think it would be an excellent fight. And Ramirez has had his mandatory called for Dorticos, so perhaps that fight might have to happen first, and Optai might still have to fight Sin Cara first. But if they both get through that, then I think come the end of this year, that will be a spectacular fight to happen. Moving on, Cameron is in talks with fighting Whittaker in 2-fight Whittaker. Seemingly, there's been a lot of back and forth between that. Boxer want to have Whittaker on a boxer show. Queensbury is saying if they're willing to pay more, then they're going to have him on a Queensbury show. I'm not too sure what's happening. Maybe Riyadh Season will get involved and make the rematch again. I'm not too sure, but like I say, it seems like Boxer do want to have a Whittaker return to Midland's big show, but I just don't know if they can actually get Cameron to agree to that, and it's kind of all going back and forth. They even put out a statement, Queensbury, which is something in which has never really been seen before, for a promotion company of that kind of magnitude to do something like that in response to an interview. But nonetheless, I don't know if we'll see the fight happen, the rematch happen, but at least Cameron has been put in a much better position because of the result of the first fight. So, I don't think, even though I believe that he does want the Whittaker rematch, it's still, his life is probably in the best position it ever has been, which is excellent to see for himself. Walsh will fight Sutherland March 16th. I think that is a good fight, to be honest. Callum Walsh versus Dean Sutherland, somebody who I had the pleasure of interviewing a while ago. It's going to be a tough test for Callum Walsh. He's had a lot of backing with him. Is he going to be able to beat Sutherland? We'll have to wait and see. Duran versus Villa, Nunez versus Batala, and Mosquera versus Vincente will fight January 17th. That is a show dedicated to Roberto Duran, which is quite nice. She kind of showing the talent from around his area. Harrington won't be turning pro. From what it seems, she won't be turning pro maybe as of yet. She might be further along down the line, but she is perhaps one of the most successful British or Irish amateurs, and she isn't ready to turn pro yet. So fair enough to her. You kind of, gotta say you gotta do whatever you want with your career. If you don't see the money being, vital enough in your life to be able to turn pro, then you don't have to. And she's doing very well for herself in the amateurs anyway. So why not stick around there? Moving on. Carty versus Callaway, Brennan versus Cronin 2, and McCrory versus Benitez will fight March 16th. De Jesus will fight February 14th. McCormack will fight Davis Jr. February 15th. Atalma has called out Huni, Pulev, Hrgovic, and Wallin. Like I mentioned, a fight versus Hrgovic, I think he's just an easy big name to be able to take off. A fight versus Pulev could be similar, but it has that WBA regular belt on the line, so perhaps that could be they're trying to make him the youngest ever heavyweight world champion, and that could be the way to do it technically, so that might happen. Huni, like I say, is the fight I want to see. Wallin, if he beats Chisora, I don't really have too much in that. If he beats Chisora well, then perhaps, but for the moment, I don't really care too much for that one. So there is names there, and there's routes in which they can go down with him. He's just won, Ring Magazine Prospect of the Year. I'll talk about that in a moment, but there, like I say, is big fights available to him. Fundora is set to fight Spence Jr. March 29th, and so Spence Jr., after I believe 2 years out, he's making a return seemingly against Fundora, and there was talks about this happening. Fundora kind of got a bye, so he didn't have to fight Crawford, but now Crawford is seemingly actually going to fight Canelo because Canelo's actually involved with Riyadh season now because he gets on with his Excellency. It's a whole spiral type thing, but in the end, Fundora is seemingly actually going to fight Spence Jr., and Spence Jr. was an excellent fighter. Even when he fought against Crawford, he was still, his stock went down, but he's still an excellent fighter. You've got to give him all the credit to what he's achieved in his career. And if he's still got anything in him, then he could definitely make for a good fight versus Fundora. So we'll have to wait and see. But Fundora is definitely getting a good payday off this, and that's deserved, to be honest, after the fight in which, was a grueling fight versus Zhu. He didn't really get the credit he deserved, and now it seems like he might be. Dev has joined Matchroom. The WBO interim world title will be on the line for Catterall versus Barboza Jr., which is excellent to see. It's seemingly because Teofimo Lopez, like I say, is seemingly messing around with things. The WBO have kind of just said that we don't really know what's going on with him, so we're just going to put that belt on the line for Catterall versus Barboza Jr. And to be honest, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Teofimo vacates his belt, so that fight could end up being for a full title, or they actually could go on to fight for a vacant title, the winner of this, so it's definitely got big repercussions. Cruz versus Salcido, Mercado versus Pedraza, Rubalcaba versus Mercado, Moses, Dev and Medeiros will fight January 25th. Cruz getting another test versus Salcido, who's coming off a big upset victory himself, and I think this is the first major test in which Cruz has been given so far, so is he going to be able to deal with it? We'll have to wait and see. He has passed most things with flying colours at the moment, but he's been moved very quickly and continues to do so. Moving on, Goodman versus Inoue was cancelled. To be completely honest, a lot of people have been quite harsh on Goodman and saying that Inoue has wasted his time waiting around for him. Goodman put himself in the position. He earned his ranking and earned his mandatory challenger status and earned the fight with Inoue, to be completely honest. It's just been unfortunate. I'm sure, is devastated, and I'm sure his family are devastated as well. You can't really do much about it. It's a recurring eye injury. You can't go into a fight like that. Perhaps you maybe should have trained a little bit lighter. Perhaps he could have maybe had more checks with the doctors and things like that beforehand to kind of make sure that this wouldn't happen again. But for the most part, it's not his fault. I'm sure he's devastated because most likely he's probably going to lose out. Perhaps Inoue might give him one more chance after the fight, in which, will now be versus Jun Kim, which is excellent to see that he's still fighting nonetheless, because I'm still here to see him fight no matter what. But maybe he'll be given one more chance. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't, and then Inoue just moves on with his career, to be honest. And then, Goodman might be able to fight for a vacant title, but it's still not the same. You'll still, even if he wins it, he won't get given the same accolades as if he was to beat Inoue, of course. Moving on, Marshall wants the rematch Shields at heavyweight. Shields, of course, is fighting Perkins, I believe, at heavyweight February 2nd, and is then probably going to want to come back down in weight. So from what I've heard, that's what she said. But Marshall wants to go and meet her up at heavyweight. And to be honest, I mean, it's excellent for the heavyweight division for women's boxing. It's never ever had this kind of level of eyes on it before, and this would be a huge rematch. Perhaps there's not really too much of a claim for a rematch, to be honest, because the first fight, Shields did win quite convincingly, but you never know. There is that rivalry there, and there always will be with Shields and Marshall, and so no matter where Shields go, I'm sure Marshall will still be wanting to follow and kind of try and get a fight with her, no matter, like I say, where she goes. Moving on, Inoue will fight, like I say, Jun Kim January 24th. So, like I say, great to see Inoue fighting still because I think he's just going to put on a show and I'm just here for it no matter what. And it could be a live opponent in Jun Kim. I'm sure he's just not going to come and roll over. Perhaps Inoue might be overlooking him. Moving on, His Excellency wants Canelo vs Crawford, Usyk vs Dubois 2, Fury vs Joshua, Garcia vs Haney 2, and Eubank Jr. vs Ben. Like I mentioned, it seems like the Canelo versus Crawford fight's actually going to happen because, kind of quite surprisingly to be honest, Canelo has just squashed the beef he's had with His Excellency and has decided to be able to negotiate with him and talk with him and work things out. And now it's seemingly like the fight with Crawford's back on. To be honest, it don't really surprise me too much because I don't think for either Crawford or Canelo there was too many options in which they were that interested in. I don't think Crawford is really that interested in the Ennis fight. If he beats Canelo, he might retire. If he might fight Ennis, then I don't know. But Canelo, I doubt he was interested in a Numbili fight, a Pacheco fight. So this fight kind of makes sense for both their careers and the magnitude of the fights in which they want. Canelo's had a few fights in which he's kind of welcomed up challengers and been able to beat them easily. So now I think this could be, a massive fight. Obviously, there's big weight differences. I don't know if I'm that keen of the weight differences between the two of them, but Crawford will have a lot of time to get up to the weight of Canelo. So if he does it well, perhaps he might be able to, still carry the skills in which he has up to there. And then, moving on, Dubois versus Usyk 2. It might happen. Usyk really hasn't commented too much, and I don't blame him. He said that he really wants to rest, and that's what he's doing at the moment. And, you got to love Usyk. You can't really say too much bad about him. He's very much earned his rest from everything he's achieved. And Dubois, of course, has to get through Parker first, which will definitely be a very tough test. Fury versus Joshua. Obviously, like I mentioned, that seemingly is, in my opinion, still an inevitable fight for 2025. Obviously, we've heard, as of today, recording this, that Fury has announced his retirement, but that is what, he's done multiple times now, and he's always come back when the money's been right. Last time it was when the money was right to fight Ngannou. This time it won't surprise me if when the money's right to fight Joshua, he comes back, gets given even more money because he's coming out of retirement and His Excellency really wants to make that fight. And it wouldn't, like I say, it just wouldn't surprise me in general if he does come back and that fight still does end up happening. So it is interesting to see kind of how little respect people are giving Fury's retirement, and really just nobody's expecting him to stay retired for long. Which, to be fair, I mean, if he is to retire, if he has retired, then he's achieved loads in the sport, and he's been a face of boxing for a long time, and he's had some amazing moments, amazing fights, and he's got a family to look after. But I just don't know if that's actually going to stop him from not coming back to fight Joshua. Garcia versus Haney too. It's an interesting one. His Excellency has kind of shown that he's willing to work with fighters who have had previous kind of drug histories, which perhaps aren't the best, as he's shown by, working with Conor Benn, and working with Jarrell Miller as well. So, it doesn't surprise me, I suppose, that he wants to make this as a rematch, but I feel like Haney's just going to wait for that fight. He says that he wants to fight back in March. Haney, but he might just sit around and wait for a Garcia rematch, to be completely honest, because it's definitely going to be his biggest payday available to him, most likely. And then Eubank Jr. vs. Ben is seemingly getting agreed. Might actually be happening, I think in April time perhaps, and I'll speak a bit more about that next week, but actually finally progress with that fight, which is about time, to be completely honest. Moving on, of course, like I mentioned previously, the Ring Magazine Awards were this week, and it's magnificent thing, to be completely honest, that the Ring Magazine is back and is creating editions, but also having just such a big impact in the sport once again, like it did back in the day. And it's bringing so many faces together and everything like that. And the photo in which they took, which had so many iconic faces from boxing now and also in past as well. It was really nice to see, and to go through the award winners. Knockout of the year was Dubois versus AJ, and of course it was a knockout that kind of shook the boxing world, to be completely honest. There's no real surprise. Comeback of the year was Billy Dibb, which was an excellent comeback of the year award to give to him. He's obviously battled so hard through what he's had to go through with having cancer, and then to be able to have the fight in which he once had, in which he did have, and leave on his terms. It was just excellent to see that he's getting this recognition that he deserves. Upset of the year was Surace, in which, I mean, it's completely fair. Absolutely nobody expected him to beat Munguia. I was one of them. I think I said that Munguia would knock him out in the early rounds. But then, of course, Surace, who really didn't have many knockouts on his record, was coming from France, was a homecoming fight for Munguia, who was on an excellent run after the Canelo loss. He knocked him out in it's crazy fashion. And I mean, I'm not too sure what's next for Surace, but it's really nice to see him getting the recognition. Round of the year was round 9 Fury Usyk 1. I don't know if that's actually arguably could be round of the year. I feel like round of the year should go to a fight in which, was back and forth in a round. One person gets dropped, another person gets dropped, or, just something a bit more emphatic that way, but they're gonna have that kind of more bias towards Fury Usyk because it's a Riyadh season event, and it was a big moment, a huge moment where you thought Usyk might be able to get Fury out of there, but Fury managed to recover well. I just don't know if it's actually deserving of a round of the year compared to the other contenders that it was up against. Uh, Prospect of the year, Talma, no surprise really. He's gone from being a kind of lower level up and coming heavyweight to now being one of the most exciting heavyweights, talking about fighting for world titles in just a few fights. And that's completely fair enough. They're calling him Prospect of the Year, Trainer of the Year. Garcia, I feel like just from what he's done with Bam Rodriguez alone, kind of sets him apart from a lot of trainers, and he's had an excellent year with Bam Rodriguez, and plus other fighters like I believe Virgil Ortiz as well. So he's definitely had an excellent year, has a great stable himself. Event of the Year, Fury Usyk 1, definitely was Event of the Year. It was a huge spectacle. Perhaps you could have said AJ vs Dubois was the event of the year, but it was definitely going to be a Riyadh season event no matter what. Fight of the year, Ford vs Komatov. It was nice to see that get the recognition in which it kind of did deserve. Fight of the year is always a tough thing to call, but when Ford wins in the final round after kind of losing all the other rounds, and in such crazy fashion where he was able to get that really, really late stoppage, you kind of can, definitely weigh up an argument for that to win. Female Fighter of the Year, Fundora. Excellent to see Fundora getting the recognition she deserves after becoming from what I believe, undisputed champion, and a young one at that to be able to do it, and has definitely brought herself away from, just being a golden boy fighter. She is now a world champion, a proven world champion, and is on route to being pound for pound number one women's fighter, one of the women's fighters. Male fighter of the year, Usyk, of course, had to be, from what he achieved, being able to beat Fury twice, it had to be Usyk. Just dealing with the pressure, the event size, and everything 2 times, you had to give it to Usyk. And the Lifetime Achievement Award went to Don King, which was an award dedicated to himself. He's perhaps done a few things a bit shady in the past, but the events in which he has put on, you kind of have to give him the accolades because boxing wouldn't be where it is now if it wasn't for somebody like Don King. And, just if you ignore some of the things in which perhaps he has done in the past, which maybe were a little bit under the table, I'm not too sure. I'm not saying anything. I don't know too much about that. Moving on, Zar Matkesh won via points versus Laburn. Bellot won via TKO in round 4 versus Singh, or Sagi won via points versus Huntley, Bozia won via points versus Butler, Payne won via points versus Zamora, Khan won via points versus Griffiths to become WBC Youth World Champion. Price won via TKO in round 1 versus Fitzmaurice. Silva won via points versus Zion. Hickey won via TKO in round 1 versus Howes. Denise won via points versus Ellison. Forrest won via TKO in round 2 versus Miller. Dubois drew versus Kamara. Simpson won by TKO in round 2 versus Woodall to remain British and Commonwealth Super Middleweight Champion. And to speak about a bit about that card and compare it to my predictions, obviously Dubois drew versus Kamara, which I got it wrong. I said Dubois would win, but I said that Dubois would win via a close split decision. Obviously, the fight didn't go past a couple of rounds, and to be honest, it probably wouldn't have gone past the third or fourth round the way that it was going. Dubois came out very quick on the blocks, managed to get the early knockdown in which she often does in her fights, and then perhaps normally cruises afterwards, but she kept the momentum going, she kept looking excellent after that, and you did kind of have to think, she's actually turned it up a notch or two and has got that level and ability to be able to get fighters out of there now. Kamara just got, I suppose, fortunate to an extent with the head clash for her record, but it's definitely still going to go down as a Dubois win, and an emphatic one, to be completely honest, at that. And she now moves on. She called out Terry Harper. I think that's a good name to call out. Hopefully that fight will happen. Will Boxer and Matchroom work together? I'm not too sure. Is Terry Harper still technically signed to Matchroom? I'm not too sure. But nonetheless, that would be a fight in which I really want to see. Of course, I want to see the Ferreira one as well, but I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Nonetheless, like I say, Dubois should be moving on to other world champions after the success she has had. And then Simpson, I mean, it was definitely an early stoppage versus Woodall. I said that Simpson would win. I believe I said late stoppage. I didn't think that Woodall would be able to deal with the pace and the aggression that Simpson would put on. It wasn't similar. He's not really a similar fighter to that of Lerone Richards. He wasn't just going to sit behind his jab. He was going to put it on him. And he did, and he had him hurt. And that first knockdown was a bad knockdown. He probably would have won in the next couple of rounds, but he didn't. Woodall didn't get given a chance to even kind of get to them couple of rounds because he took a couple more and the ref just called it like that. It's unfortunate for Woodall. You see it happen quite a lot, but for Simpson, it's a huge win. I'm sure everybody watching, when you were listening to this post-fight speech of his, it was emotional. It was sad. The loss of his sister. He showed that he really had a lot to come into this fight with, and he managed to really let out that anger, I suppose, to an extent, even just a little bit, and now moves on. He's called out Liam Cameron, which is an interesting one. Mark Jeffers has been waiting around, but I think he knows that Mark Jeffers perhaps isn't the biggest of names. I feel bad for Mark Jeffers because, like I say, he has been waiting around, but anybody in their fight career, I always kind of say, don't wait around for fights to happen because a lot of the time you can get frustrated and they just won't happen. He's called out Cameron because Cameron has got the eyes on him at the moment. He's obviously at light heavyweight, so I don't know if he would get down to super middleweight anyway, but nonetheless, I just don't think it will happen, and I think Cameron is going to wait for a big fight to happen, but I just don't think it would be Boxer working with Queensberry if they're not willing to work with Queensberry for the Whittaker fight. I just don't see it happening for a Callum Simpson fight instead. Moving on, Rivera won by KO in round 2 versus Guerrero. Lopez has called out Hitchens, like I mentioned. Billum Smith has called out Jack, so he wants to get back into fighting for world title contention. Canelo has agreed to fight Crawford in September. Like I say, it's actually going to happen in September. Hopefully it will, but just fingers crossed it will. I've spoke about this already, and it's just happened and progressed very quickly. And Sturm will fight Brindert February 15th, and that's all the boxing news. Moving on now to the MMA news. Cejudo versus Yadong, Font versus Cruz, Barboza versus Garcia, Silva versus Abag Hadsarian, Allen versus Hernandez, Chiesa, Fugit versus Delatov, Kutalaba versus Aslan, Juwakani, Abdul Malik versus Tricoli, and Bu Korsakas versus Kiera will fight February 22nd. And I think in general, UFC have been coming into 2025 really trying to up the level of fight nights and the quality of the fight nights. Perhaps this one was on paper not the biggest one, this one that happened just this weekend, but this one that they've announced, Cejudo Yadong, Font Cruz, Barboza Garcia, also Fluffy Hernandez as well versus Allen is an excellent fight. Of course, they've got Curtis Blades as well fighting on it, so it's an excellent fight night. And they've also got another fight night in the British one with Edwards versus Della Maddalena, and they've also got Adesanya versus Imavov, which is another great card as well. And then you look at the main, the pay-per-view, they've got this coming up this next weekend. I think they're really trying to step up their game and really trying to step up the fights in which they have on on all their shows, and it's excellent to see, and it's, bringing the fighters up well, and I'm so here for it. And Font versus Cruz is an interesting one. Dominic Cruz has said this is his last fight no matter what. It's interesting to see that it's not against Cejudo because of their back and forths in which they've had in the past, but Rob Font, is still a good creditable name if he is able to try and go out there and get a win. And then Cejudo versus Yadong is a good fight. I still would want to see Cejudo versus O'Malley possibly at some point this year. If Cejudo gets through Yadong, that's a fight in my opinion that definitely could happen. But we will have to wait and see how he fares versus Yadong. Moving on, Superbon has been elevated to one featherweight kickboxing world champion. The PFL have changed their tournament prize money to 500k, which, to be completely honest, is getting bantered by everybody in the MMA community because obviously they had that 1 million prize money, and that was the main reason, I suppose, why they were getting so many fighters coming over to fight in their competitions, because they had that prize money and it was such a big draw. But it's been slashed in half now. It wouldn't surprise me if next year it gets slashed in half again. Are they really struggling with money? Perhaps, and it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of their talent starts to leave soon. Perhaps signing Ngannou really took a big hit to them, and yeah, I just don't know if financially it's actually making sense for them at the moment. Almabayev versus Ursig, Hak Parasta versus Ribovics, and Johnson versus Temerov will fight March 1st. Hernandez will fight Holobar March 15th. Aliev won via decision versus Solecki. Klein won via KO in round 2 versus Dudakova. Lopez won via decision versus Gadsi Hayasulov. Ricciarte won via split decision versus Cagliari. Smith won via KO in round 1 versus Parsons. Moises won via decision versus Ogden. Tulio won via KO in round 1 versus Portiera. Bunez won via submission in round 1 versus Johnson. Soriano won via KO in round 1 versus Medic. Rodriguez won via decision versus Bashi. Kopolov won via KO in round 3 versus Curtis. Almeida won via KO in round 1 versus Al Hassan. Ponzinibbio won via KO in round 3 versus Harris. And Dern won via submission in round 3 versus Ribas. And to speak a bit more about this UFC fight night, which, like I say, on paper wasn't a big one, but I think it delivered. I think it had some entertaining and some interesting moments, and controversy creates eyes, creates views, and we had that a bit with the Curtis moment with him getting stopped in the final second. For his credibility as a fighter, it's going to be frustrating, it's going to be annoying. He probably did lose the fight anyway, so I don't really think in the long run it really made that big of a difference, but it was a bad stoppage, and to be honest, worse than the Woodall versus Simpson stoppage. He really wasn't that rocked anyway, and it was much later on the fight, literally 1 second, and it would have ended. So that was a strange one, but like I say, brought more eyes to the actual event. Almeida, that KO versus Al Hassan was a huge KO. Obviously, going to get talked about as KO of the year contender already. There's going to be other KOs that are going to come, which are going to be bigger and more emphatic and more creative, which I'm sure are probably going to overshadow this one. But it was an excellent one. I mean, Al Hassan was being talked about how powerful he was and was coming with some powerful shots, had given some powerful shots to Almeida, but then Almeida just responded with the bang, bang, bang when he's under pressure, and then got him out there in clear, dramatic fashion, just that cold knockout in which you are always kind of like, whoa, what on earth just happened when you see that? And then Dern, that submission win versus Ribas, has really shown that I think she has, maybe to an extent, changed her career around. I think she has developed as a fighter. I think she's really using her jiu-jitsu well, and she is a jiu-jitsu wrestler type fighter, but she's just never been able to utilize it as much as I suppose she could. And I think it was like the first time she'd submitted a fighter in like 4 years, and saying, like I say, she is typically a jiu-jitsu submission wrestler type fighter. It's just weird to see that it's taken this long, but she's got this from what I believe a new team, and she's fighting very well, and that's a good win versus Ribas. This could be the redemption year for Mackenzie Dern, where perhaps she could get herself into a high contender spot again after back-to-back wins now. It wouldn't surprise me if another 1 or 2 more wins and she's back in that high contention spot again. And so yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like it if you didn't, like video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.